There is a man sitting by a stream, doing something that requires significant concentration and a steady hand. He has a piece of flint in his fingers, not a large dramatic hand axe, but a small, carefully prepared flake, with an edge that is, by the standards of the technology available to him, extraordinarily sharp. Sharper than most modern razor blades, in fact, which is not an exaggeration. A freshly knapped flint edge at the microscopic level can achieve a sharpness that surgical steel struggles to match. He is using this edge to remove hair from his face. Not quickly, not carelessly, with the specific focused attention that any procedure involving a very sharp object and the skin of your face demands. He works along the jawline, then the upper lip, then the neck. The process takes time. The process has clearly been done before because the movements have a practiced quality, a specific learned economy that first-timers do not have. When he is done, he examines his reflection in the water, and whatever he sees there satisfies something, some internal standard, some social expectation, some personal preference, because he sets down the flint with the specific quality of completion that comes when a task has been done to the level it needed to be done. This is ancient grooming, and yes, it happened. The question is how often, why, with what tools, and what it tells us about how ancient humans thought about their own appearance and the social signals they sent with their bodies. Because the answer to whether ancient humans shaved is not simply yes or no. It is a story about tools that were sharper than people realize, about social signals that were as complex as anything modern culture produces, about the specific biology of human hair growth and how ancient humans engaged with it, and about what the evidence, both archaeological and comparative, tells us about people who cared about how they looked in a world where caring about how you looked had genuinely practical stakes. Let's start with the tools, because the tools are both the most surprising dimension of this story and the most important practical foundation for everything else. Flint and obsidian, the primary knapped stone tool materials of ancient humans, can be worked to edges of extraordinary sharpness. The physics of this is straightforward. Both materials are amorphous rather than crystalline at the atomic level, which means they fracture in a smooth, continuous curve rather than along crystal planes. This allows the napper to produce edges that taper to a thickness of a few atoms at their finest point, thinner than any metal tool can be ground, because metal's crystalline structure limits how fine an edge can ultimately become before it deforms rather than cuts. Archaeological experiments with freshly knapped flint have produced measurable cutting performance that matches or exceeds commercial surgical steel in specific tasks, particularly those requiring the cutting of soft tissue. The same edge geometry that makes flint effective for butchering an animal, drawing across soft tissue with minimal lateral force, makes it effective for shaving. The limitations of flint as a shaving tool are practical rather than material. The brittleness of the edge means it cannot be stropped or rehoned the way metal razors can, and it dulls with use in a pattern that is different from metal dulling. But a freshly knapped flint or obsidian flake is a genuinely effective shaving tool. How do we know this practically? Because obsidian blades are still used in surgery today, not metaphorically, not historically. Actually, in specific modern surgical applications where the sharpness of the obsidian edge and its specific tissue interaction properties make it preferable to surgical steel for certain delicate procedures. The ancient tool material that predates written history by hundreds of thousands of years is a contemporary surgical instrument. This fact deserves a moment of appreciation before we continue. Now let's look at the direct archaeological evidence for ancient grooming practices. Because evidence exists, and it is more specific than most people expect. The most direct physical evidence of ancient hair removal comes from a somewhat unexpected source: ancient art. The figurative art of the ancient period, the paintings and carvings produced across tens of thousands of years before civilization, sometimes depicts human figures. And when those figures are depicted in enough detail to assess their facial hair status, the evidence is informative. The human figures depicted in ancient European cave art from approximately 25,000 to 35,000 years ago are sometimes shown with smooth faces. The Venus figurines, the carved female forms found across a wide geographic range dating to this period, occasionally show stylized facial features that, while not definitively indicating the presence or absence of facial hair, are consistent with a representational tradition that paid attention to facial appearance as a meaningful feature of human identity. More directly, at ancient sites in the Americas, where copper tools developed earlier than in many Old World contexts, archaeological finds of small copper implements have been identified as possible hair removal tools based on their form, their size, and the wear patterns on their working surfaces. In the European ancient record, small scrapers with specific wear patterns consistent with skin working rather than hide processing have been found in contexts that some researchers have interpreted as personal grooming tools. The most compelling indirect evidence comes from the archaeological distribution of personal grooming attention more broadly. Ancient humans who were making and wearing elaborate personal ornaments, who were using pigments to decorate their bodies and possibly their hair, who were producing the kind of elaborate personal presentation that ancient beads and pendants represent. These were people who were paying sustained, deliberate attention to their appearance. The inference that they were also managing their body hair in some form is not a leap. It is a reasonable extension of a documented behavioral pattern. Let's talk about the biology of human hair growth, because it is more relevant to this question than most people realize, and it creates a specific context for understanding ancient grooming motivations. Human males produce beard growth under the influence of androgens, primarily dihydrotestosterone, beginning at puberty and continuing throughout adult life. Left unmanaged, beard hair grows at approximately 1 centimeter per month, potentially reaching substantial lengths over a period of months. A fully grown beard on an adult male who has never shaved represents several months to years of growth, and the practical implications of this in the ancient context are not trivial. Long beard hair traps food particles. It provides habitat for lice and other ectoparasites. It can be grabbed by an opponent in physical conflict. It reduces thermal efficiency in hot weather by trapping air near the face. In cold weather, it accumulates condensation from breath that freezes in Arctic conditions. For ancient men engaged in the physically active, practically demanding life of hunting and foraging, the long, unmanaged beard is not simply an aesthetic choice. It has practical implications that an ancient man with any attention to the functional demands of his life would have had reasons to manage. This does not mean ancient men universally shaved to a smooth-faced standard. It means they had practical reasons to manage facial hair in some way, whether through the equivalent of trimming, through selective removal, or through full shaving that went beyond vanity into the domain of practical functionality. The female body hair dimension is different and worth addressing separately. Human females produce less body and facial hair than males due to lower androgen levels, but they do produce underarm hair, leg hair, and pubic hair, all of which have been managed and removed in traditional cultures across the world. The evidence for female body hair removal in traditional societies is widespread enough to suggest ancient origins, and the motivations include both practical considerations, parasite management, hygiene, and social and aesthetic ones. Let's talk about parasites specifically, because this is one of the most compelling practical arguments for ancient hair management, and one that is almost entirely absent from popular discussions of ancient grooming. Lice are one of the most ancient and persistent parasites of the human lineage. We have established in other discussions that human body lice evolved from head lice approximately 83,000 to 170,000 years ago, a divergence that required the consistent wearing of clothing to provide the alternative. Habitat that body lice evolved to exploit. Head lice, which live in scalp hair, have been co-evolving with humans for even longer. Lice cause several direct problems for their hosts: the constant irritation of biting, the skin damage from scratching, and the disease transmission that some louse species enable, including typhus. In the ancient world, where high parasite loads were a consistent drain on health and energy, any strategy that reduced lice populations on the body had genuine health value. Hair removal is one of the most effective louse control strategies available. Lice require hair to anchor their eggs and to maintain their position on the host. Shaved or very short hair dramatically reduces the viable habitat for lice and makes their removal through manual picking, the traditional delousing method documented in primates and traditional human societies, significantly more effective. This is not speculation. Traditional cultures with documented practices of head shaving consistently report parasite control as among the practical motivations. Military traditions of close-cropped hair in historical contexts specifically cite parasite control as a primary functional rationale. The ancient human who managed beard hair and body hair was managing their parasite load in a way that had real health consequences. And ancient humans, whose detailed empirical observation of cause and effect was their primary survival tool, would have made this connection through observation. Let's talk about the social signaling dimension, because this is ultimately what most of the evidence points toward as the primary driver of ancient grooming practices. Personal appearance in ancient small small group communities was not a private matter. It was community visible, continuously observable, and laden with social information. The way an individual managed their appearance communicated things about their social status, their group membership, their personal identity, and their attention to the social norms that community membership required. The evidence for deliberate body modification in the ancient world goes far beyond simple hair management. Scarification, tattooing, tooth modification, skull modification, and the elaborate ornamental practices documented at ancient sites all speak to communities in which deliberate modification of the body's appearance was a significant social technology, a way of communicating identity, status, and group affiliation in a world without written language or other symbolic communication systems. In this context, facial hair management, the decision to maintain a beard or to remove it, the specific form in which facial hair was kept, the specific combination of maintained and removed hair that an individual presented to their community, was almost certainly meaningful social information. Not in the specific codified way that modern formal dress codes or occupational uniforms carry meaning, but in the more fluid, community-specific way that traditional cultures organize the social information encoded in appearance. Cross-cultural anthropological evidence shows remarkable variation in the specific norms around male facial hair in traditional societies. Some cultures value the full beard as a mark of masculine maturity and social standing. Some cultures have practices of beard removal that are associated with specific social roles or ritual transitions. Some cultures show both practices simultaneously for different social categories of men. The variation itself tells us something important. The management of facial hair is not simply a neutral bodily function left to chance in traditional human societies. It is an active social practice organized by cultural norms that vary by community, but that exist in every community that has been systematically studied. This means that ancient communities almost certainly had norms around facial hair management, specific expectations about how adult men in good social standing should manage their appearance, and specific social signals communicated by deviation from those norms in either direction. Let's talk about what specific ancient tools have been found in archaeological contexts that suggest personal grooming, because the specificity of the archaeological evidence is more interesting than the general claim. Alongside the flint and obsidian flakes that could serve as shaving tools, ancient archaeological sites across multiple periods and regions have produced implements that researchers have identified as personal grooming tools based on their size, form, and wear patterns. Small bone implements, thin, pointed, with specific wear patterns at their tips consistent with picking at close range rather than working a surface, appear at ancient sites in contexts suggesting personal use rather than food processing or tool making. These have been interpreted by some researchers as hair picks or probes, tools for the detailed management of hair in ways that require precision rather than broad strokes. Small stone tablets with fine grinding surfaces found at ancient sites have been interpreted as grinding surfaces for the preparation of pigments or other substances applied to hair and skin. In later ancient contexts, the association of such objects with personal adornment materials is more firmly established, but the earlier examples suggest a continuity of personal preparation activity going back significantly in time. The presence of shellfish remains at ancient sites far from any coast, brought specifically to inland locations, has been interpreted in part in terms of their use as containers for personal grooming preparations. Marine shells are used as cosmetic containers in traditional cultures worldwide, and their presence at inland sites suggests that whatever materials were being stored in them were considered worth the logistical cost of transporting the shells long distances. Taken together, these finds paint a picture of ancient humans who engaged in deliberate, tool-using personal grooming practices that went beyond what incidental or purely functional maintenance would require. Let's talk about the specific technology of ancient plucking, because this is a hair removal method that requires no napped stone tool and that leaves no archaeological trace, but that almost certainly was practiced by ancient humans. Plucking, the manual removal of individual hairs or small groups of hairs by grasping and pulling, is one of the simplest and most universally documented hair removal methods in traditional cultures. It requires only functional fingers and sufficient pain tolerance, both of which ancient humans had in abundance. It is more time-consuming than shaving for large areas, but is more precise, more controllable, and does not require any tool that needs to be manufactured or maintained. Eyebrow management through plucking. The specific alteration of the eyebrow shape that that is documented as a cosmetic practice across a remarkable range of traditional cultures, requires no tools whatsoever, and leaves no archaeological trace. Its universality across traditional cultures, including those with no historical contact, suggests an ancient origin as a personal grooming practice. Eyebrows are socially significant in ways that make their management particularly meaningful. They are one of the most expressive and socially readable features of the human face, carrying enormous amounts of social and emotional information in their position and configuration. An ancient person who deliberately shaped their eyebrows was manipulating a specific and powerful channel of facial communication, one that every member of their community read continuously and automatically in the course of normal social interaction. The social significance of this specific form of grooming was not trivial. Let's bring the razor shell evidence into the picture, because this is one of the more fascinating specific material culture finds related to ancient grooming. Bivalve shells, particularly those with fine, sharp edges on their growth margins, function as natural razors with cutting properties that, while not matching freshly knapped obsidian, are sufficient for effective hair removal. The use of shell edges as cutting tools is documented in traditional cultures across the Pacific, the Americas, and other coastal regions, and the specific application to personal grooming, including shaving, is documented in multiple ethnographic accounts. At ancient coastal and near-coastal sites where shell accumulations are present, the specific wear patterns on some bivalve shells are consistent with cutting soft material, a wear pattern different from the percussion and crushing wear that shells used for food processing show. Some researchers have interpreted these shells as personal grooming tools, razors made from locally available, easily acquired, easily replaced natural materials that required no manufacturing beyond collection. The elegant thing about shell razors as ancient grooming tools is their practical advantages within their specific context. They are free, abundant in coastal environments, immediately replaceable when they dull, and of sufficient sharpness for effective use. An ancient coastal community would have had continuous access to effective hair removal tools in the shells that washed up on their beaches or that they harvested for food. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Here is something that the grooming question opens up that most people have not considered: the relationship between ancient hair management and the broader evidence for ancient body consciousness and self-presentation. Ancient humans were aware of themselves as beings that appeared in specific ways to other beings. This self-consciousness, the capacity to think about how one appears from the outside, to model the perception of oneself in the minds of others, is one of the most distinctively human cognitive capacities, and its expression in deliberate appearance management goes back to the earliest evidence of symbolic behavior: the ochre applied to bodies and possibly hair, the shell beads carefully sewn onto garments, the perforated teeth worn as pendants, the elaborate personal ornament assemblages found at ancient burial sites. These are all expressions of the same fundamental human self-consciousness: the awareness that one presents a surface to the world, that this surface communicates information, and that this information can be deliberately managed. Hair management sits squarely within this same framework of deliberate self-presentation. The ancient person who managed their facial hair, their body hair, their head hair in specific ways was making choices about how they appeared to the community. Choices that carried social information and that reflected both personal preference and community norms. The evidence from the full range of ancient personal adornment and body modification practices makes it essentially impossible to maintain that ancient humans were indifferent to their appearance while simultaneously engaging in the elaborate ornamental and body modification practices that the archaeological record documents. Appearance consciousness and appearance management were continuous features of ancient human social life. Grooming was part of that system. Let me bring this back to the man at the stream. When he finishes and looks at his reflection, he is not just checking whether the job is done. He is participating in something that is as ancient as human self-consciousness itself: the act of looking at oneself and assessing how one appears to others, of managing that appearance deliberately, of bringing one's physical presentation into alignment with whatever social and personal standards the community he belongs to has developed. The tools are different from a modern razor. The specific aesthetic standards are different from any modern culture's expectations about facial facial hair. The social meanings attached to the specific choices he is making are encoded in a cultural framework that we cannot fully reconstruct from the evidence available to us. But the act itself, the deliberate management of facial hair using the best available tools in service of social presentation standards that the community maintains and that individual membership requires meeting, is the same act that has been happening in every human society in every era since ancient humans developed the cognitive capacity for self-consciousness and the social structures that make appearance management meaningful. Ancient humans shaved, not with the specific tools or the specific frequency or the specific aesthetic standards of any modern culture, but with the same basic motivation, the management of personal appearance in service of social communication and identity that drives the same behavior today. They looked in the water. They made choices about what they saw. They used the tools available to them to make those choices real. And then they went back to their community, presenting the face they had decided to present, and whatever that face communicated in the specific social language of their specific ancient world was received and read by the people around them exactly as intended. Some things are very old.